It was the early spring of 1993 in Charlotte, North Carolina. A city filled with southern charm and a gentle rhythm of life, where neighbors greeted each other with friendly smiles, and children played freely in the streets. But hidden beneath the seemingly peaceful facade was a growing darkness. A predator was about to make his mark. Henry Louis Wallace, a man with an unassuming face and a quiet demeanor, had already blended into the community. To the people around him, he was just another neighbor. But they had no idea that he was capable of committing horrific acts that would forever scar the city. On March 6, 1993, the first of the victims, Tashanda Bethia, vanished. The 18-year-old had been full of dreams for her future, but that bright future was stolen in the most brutal way. She was found later in a secluded part of the city, her life taken by the hands of a man no one had suspected. No one had imagined that such evil could be so close, so quiet. The city was shaken, but there were no answers. No leads. Just the empty feeling of dread hanging in the air. Less than 2 months later, the killer struck again. This time, the victim was Sharon Nance, a 33-year-old woman who lived her life quietly, going about her business with little fanfare. She too had dreams, hopes for a better tomorrow. But that night, as she walked alone, Wallace was waiting. Sharon was attacked violently. The horror that she must have felt in her final moments was incomprehensible. Wallace showed no mercy. She was suffocated, her body left in a desolate area, discarded like trash. Her family was left reeling, their grief compounded by the silence of the police. By this time, fear had begun to grip Charlotte. People were locking their doors at night, checking their surroundings constantly. But it wasn't enough. Wallace's hunger for death grew with every passing day. His next victim was Caroline Love, a 38-year-old woman who had just moved to Charlotte to escape a troubled past. She was looking to start fresh, but little did she know that her life would be violently cut short. Caroline, like the others, was unaware of the monster lurking nearby. Wallace manipulated his way into her life, pretending to be a friendly figure in her new city. But in the darkness of a quiet alley, his true nature surfaced. He attacked her with a savagery that shocked even him. 38 stab wounds. She was left to bleed in a place no one would ever think to look. Her body, like the others, was left in a hidden area, a graveyard of lost souls. The killings were no longer isolated events. They were part of a pattern that no one could yet see. In 1994, Wallace's rage began to spread further, and his kills became more frequent. He didn't just kill anymore, he sought to make each death more violent, more torturous than the last. The fear in Charlotte was palpable. Every woman who walked the streets, every mother who tucked her children into bed, every husband who left for work in the morning, feared the same thing. Would they be next? Would they be the next woman on Wallace's twisted list? Henrietta Wright was a 35-year-old woman, known for her vibrant personality. She was a mother and a friend, someone who could light up any room she walked into. But on a fateful night in 1994, she became Wallace's fourth victim. She was strangled and dumped in a remote area of Charlotte. The sight of her lifeless body sent waves of shock through the city. For the first time, people began to realize that something far darker was at play here. This wasn't random violence. This was the work of a serial killer. The brutal pattern continued into 1995. Deborah Slaughter, a 26-year-old woman, became the next victim. Wallace's control over his killings had grown, and with it, his confidence. He stalked her for days, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. On the night she disappeared, she was on her way home, completely unaware that she was walking into the killer's trap. She was found the next day, lifeless and abandoned. The brutality of her murder made it impossible to ignore. Something had to be done. But the police were still no closer to finding Wallace. The clues remained elusive, and with each passing day, his confidence grew. The next victim, Tammy Watson, was just 29 years old. Wallace had become bolder now, even more brazen. He began to target women who lived alone, women who were vulnerable and easy to take. Tammy had no idea that the kind man who had helped her with her groceries that day was the same man who would end her life. She was strangled in her own apartment, a chilling reminder that no one was safe. And once again, Wallace vanished, leaving behind only another body and more unanswered questions. By the summer of 1996, the killings had stopped being isolated tragedies. They were a series of linked deaths, a trail of violence that had scarred an entire city. Yet the police were no closer to finding Wallace. His ability to remain undetected was haunting. There were whispers in the streets, among the women of Charlotte. Rumors of a man with cold eyes who had been seen near the bodies, or who had been in the vicinity when the women were last seen. But none of these whispers brought the killer any closer to justice. Angela Blunt, a 26-year-old woman, was Wallace's seventh victim. Her death was brutal. She had been with her friends earlier that day, laughing, living her life, not knowing it would be the last time she'd ever experience joy. Wallace had been watching her for days, learning her routine, until finally, one night, he took her. Her body was found the next day, discarded like a piece of garbage. The horror of her murder spread quickly through Charlotte, and people began to realize just how far the killer had gone. To understand the man Henry had become, you have to go back to his childhood. Born in 1965 in Barnwell, South Carolina, he grew up in a modest, struggling household. His father had left before he was even born, leaving his mother to raise him alone in a tiny, neglected home. Though his mother was a strict disciplinarian, there was a deep vacancy in Henry's heart, an emptiness left by the absence of his father and the lack of emotional warmth at home. As a young boy, he sought acceptance, but it was clear that his need for love and connection would never be fulfilled. Henry's early life had shaped his view of the world as cold, indifferent, and harsh. He didn't know what love felt like, only loneliness, neglect, and rejection. His mother's heavy-handedness fueled his resentment, while his distant upbringing sowed the seeds of his future cruelty. From a young age, he became withdrawn, cold, and easily manipulated by darker impulses. By the time he was a teenager, Henry had begun to understand his true nature. He was no longer just a boy trying to find his way. He was a young man with a twisted fascination. In the woods near his home, Henry stumbled across something that would forever change him, a violent encounter between a group of men and a woman. He watched from a distance as they attacked her, with blood staining the earth around them. But instead of feeling fear or horror, Henry felt something else, a sick, dark curiosity. His pulse quickened, and he was transfixed by the chaos and brutality. The seed had been planted. That moment marked the beginning of his dark obsession. From then on, he would seek to dominate women, physically, emotionally, and mentally. They became mere objects to him, vessels through which he could satisfy his deep-seated need for control and power. The boy who had once been neglected and abandoned had become someone else entirely, a predator in the making. Henry's first murder was an accident, or at least that's what he told himself. Tashanda Betha, a girl from his school, accepted a ride from him on a night like any other. They had known each other for years. But once she was in the car, everything changed. The passenger seat, the dark, lonely roads, everything felt like a trap. Without warning, Henry snapped. He attacked Tashanda with unrelenting force, choking the life out of her with his bare hands. It wasn't just a murder. It was a brutal act of dominance. He left her body in a nearby pond, thinking he had gotten away with the perfect crime. He was calm, detached, like it had all been a normal part of his day. The body was discovered, but the police had no idea who was responsible. Henry blended into the background, his charm disarming any suspicion. No one knew the monster lurking in plain sight. Though Henry thought the first murder would satisfy his dark desires, it only fueled them further. His next victim, Sharon Nance, was a woman who had struggled throughout her life. She had dreams of turning her life around, but Henry didn't care. To him, she was just another object, another opportunity to feel powerful. He stalked Sharon for days, learning her routines, finding the perfect moment to strike. When the time came, he overwhelmed her with force. The brutality of his actions was unimaginable. She fought, screamed, yet it wasn't enough. Sharon's life was violently snuffed out. She, like all of Henry's victims, would never get the chance to experience life beyond his cruelty. The city was becoming paralyzed with fear. Women were disappearing without a trace, and the police had no leads. Henry, however, remained calm. He watched the fear he had created spread across Charlotte like wildfire. The city's darkest secret was growing, and it would be impossible to stop it now. Despite the growing fear in the city, the investigation stalled. With each new murder, the fear grew more intense, but the police couldn't connect the dots. The women had nothing in common, and there were no discernible patterns to the killings. The victims' families were left in agony, searching for answers, hoping for justice. And yet, Henry remained a ghost in the system. But then, an anonymous tip surfaced. It was small, just a name, a vague description. However, it was enough. Henry Louis Wallace's name was now at the forefront of the investigation. The police dug deeper into his life, pulling apart his history. They discovered his connections to the victims, the similarities in the murders, and eventually, his terrifying personality. The arrest of Henry Louis Wallace was a major breakthrough, but the trial that followed was nothing short of a public spectacle. The courtroom was packed with spectators, the tension in the air so thick it could be cut with a knife. The families of the victims sat in anguish, their emotions raw as they confronted the man who had destroyed their lives. Henry's defense attorneys tried to argue that his crimes were committed under the influence of addiction and mental illness. They painted him as a man who had been led astray by circumstances beyond his control. But the prosecution's case was airtight. Evidence linked him to each of the murders, and Henry himself had confessed to killing 11 women. In January 1997, after a grueling trial, Henry was found guilty of all charges. He was sentenced to death. The courtroom erupted in a mix of relief and sorrow, but for the families of his victims, it was too little, too late. They would never get their loved ones back. Henry had taken that from them forever. In one of the most bizarre twists of the case, while Henry sat on death row, awaiting his execution, he managed to secure a wife. Rebecca Tuss, a former prison nurse, fell for Henry's charm. She was drawn to him, despite the horror of his crimes. The world watched in shock and disbelief as Henry married Rebecca, even while he was incarcerated for his murders. How could anyone, let alone a woman, fall for such a monster? It seemed incomprehensible. For the families of the victims, this union felt like a slap in the face. They couldn't understand how someone could fall for someone so vile. Yet, this strange and twisted marriage only further proved the depth of Henry's manipulative nature. He wasn't just a killer. He was a master at convincing others of his innocence, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Henry Louis Wallace remains on death row to this day, awaiting execution for the 11 murders he committed. The families of his victims will never fully heal from the pain he caused, the grief that has haunted them for decades. But justice, though delayed, is still on its way. Henry's final day is drawing near, and as time ticks away, one question remains unanswered. Why? Why did he do it? What drove a man to commit such unimaginable horrors? The city of Charlotte will never forget the reign of terror that Henry Louis Wallace unleashed. His name has become synonymous with fear and evil, a dark stain on the history of the city. But as we wait for the final chapter of his story to unfold, one thing is certain: the pain he caused will never go away. The scars he left behind are permanent, etched into the lives of the victims' families forever. Please, remember to subscribe and hit the like button to continue supporting more chilling real-life stories. Stay tuned for more true crime tales, and thank you for watching.